Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambattvamanusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanai Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sudham Devam Kamsachanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Thank you all for joining us again for tonight's Gita class. We're in the middle of chapter 13 and in the middle of some very profound teachings that reveal the identity of the individual soul with the Supreme Soul. It's probably one of the most essential themes to not just the Bhagavad Gita, but to Advaita Vedanta on the whole. So it's pretty heavy, and that's why we're taking it slow, trying to at least. And it's not one of those things where you can tell a lot of jokes and say, Amma was talking about this the other day. So we have to go through it for what it is and try to remain alert as we're going through the verses, because they're very subtle and very profound. In verses 13 to 18, Lord Krishna was discussing the topic of what is called the Niyam, that which is to be known, which we found out later is basically the Param Brahma, the Supreme Being, in the form of Chaitanyam, or what we call in English, consciousness. And Krishna used the metaphor of light because it's an expression that we use to convey the meaning of consciousness. It's both of them illuminate something. You know, light is what enables us to illuminate the world around us and our sense organs also. So if it's not vision, even the ears and the nose and all the other sense organs need something to illuminate those objects that it connects with. And that illuminating capacity is there in common. So the light illuminates physically, whereas consciousness illuminates metaphysically. It enables us to know things and see things. And if you're sitting in a class and you are trying to understand what the professor or the teacher is saying, the consciousness is also illuminating the subject matter through your intellect, through your memory. And so all these things require consciousness, the power of consciousness. It doesn't mean that you're awake. It means that that faculty of conscious sentience is needed in order to make all these things work. So that capacity to illuminate is only there in the presence of consciousness. And without consciousness, nothing in this whole world can be known. The eye's power of illumination depends on the light of Atma Chaitanya, the consciousness of the self. All other, so-called lights, jyotis, require consciousness, but consciousness itself does not require any other illuminating power because it is self-luminous. This is the point. So in the previous verse, last verse we covered, Krishna was talking about how consciousness illuminates both light and darkness. So that means essentially it's beyond both of those. And the only thing that can be beyond light and dark is consciousness. And because the light and dark is also a symbol of knowledge and ignorance. So it's the ultimate illuminator, we could say, is consciousness. And this verse, because verse 19 was so profound in pointing out that the consciousness within us is one with Brahman, that is such a profound statement. It's the essence of the Vedas, of the Upanishads and all the scriptures. We can call that verse a Mahavakya, a great dictum that summarizes the essence of all the teachings. Now, in verses 20 to 24, we're going to hear about two more topics, which are the final two out of 6 topics that form the core of this chapter. And if you remember, they came up due to a question posed by Arjuna at the beginning of the chapter. And those two remaining subjects are Prakrti and Purusha. Prakrti and Purusha are very commonly used in the Sankhya philosophy. When you talk about the 6 schools of philosophy in India, one of them is that. But this Sankhya philosophy is not the same Sankhya that is mentioned in the 2nd chapter of the Gita and is used in the Gita language. It is actually a pre-existing school of thought at Krishna's time, and he's just repurposing the same jargon because it must have been familiar to everybody, but he's using it in some different ways also, so we have to pay attention to that. Not that everybody's a big fan of Sankhya philosophy, but in case you've heard of it, don't confuse that with the way Krishna uses this terminology in the Gita. So we will read verse 20 together. You can repeat after me in Sanskrit. Prakrtim Purushan Chaiva Vidyanadi Ubhavapi Vikaramscha Gunamschaiva Vidhi Prakriti Sambhavan. So I didn't change the translation of this at all. It's simply know that both Prakriti and Purusha are beginningless, and know also that all modifications and Gunas are born of Prakriti. I'm going to leave that slide for a moment. We're going to explain what Prakriti and Purusha are. So you don't have to worry about that. And this word guna is basically, it normally means, what we would be most familiar with is the trigunas or the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas. And it still means that, but here in this verse, this word guna, or the plural gunas, refers to a much broader meaning. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so about the meaning, we can go on from the slide. No, not that yet, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Previously, Krishna discussed the other 4 topics individually, like the kshetra, the field, and the kshetrajna, the knower of the field. He talked about them separately. But when he talks about Prakriti and Purusha, he's talking about them simultaneously. And there's a very good reason for that, which we're all going to see very soon. So, in this context, Prakrti, that word Prakrti, you don't have to learn another term. It's just another name for Maya. Now we know about Maya. We have a very intimate relationship with Maya because unfortunately that's where we're stuck at this point in time. So this Prakrti Maya is basically nothing but matter. Matter both in the concrete or sthula form that we are familiar with, like this desk, this microphone, everything around us, our house, our car, all our clothes, this is all matter, right? And even on the scientific field, in the scientific field, they have found smaller and smaller and subtler matter. But if it's something that's part of this universe, we expect it to be detectable by some kind of equipment. But in the difference between that scientific approach and what Vedanta says is that there are even imperceptible versions of the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, etc. So those subtle 5 elements cannot be detected by any of the equipment we have today, but they were the precursors to the concrete 5 elements. So those are also considered to be matter, just in a very subtle form. So you have the subtle 5 elements, you have the 5 elements that we know, and then at the very beginning, it was actually just the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. From there came the subtle, and then from the subtle ones came the concrete ones. So all of this, according to Vedanta, is matter. So as soon as the creation began, it was all matter. And then, everything that we know of scientifically and experientially is simply Prakrti. And so we should know that, we should understand that. All materials are born out of that fundamental matter, whichever level you look at it on. If you look at it from the gunas, yes. From the subtle form, yes. In the concrete form, yes. Everything is from this Prakrti material. And in fact, the etymological meaning of Prakrti is primary substance or original source, things like that. So an example would be like this desk that I'm using. Wood is the Prakrti for the furniture, for the table. Gold is the Prakrti for all the ornaments and all the jewelry that people wear. So it is the fundamental substance for everything in this world, including our body, including our mind, including our intellect, everything. We're going to get to that in a moment. And then in this context, Purusha, that word Purusha, you don't have to learn a new term. It's just another name for Kshatrajna. And what was Kshatrajna? It was the self. It was the Atman. So we have the same thing that we've been calling it Atman the whole time. He's just using a different term to make a point. Because now he's not talking about the Atma, as something that's the indweller in our body, so to speak. He's talking about it, juxtaposing it with Purusha, so with Prakrti. So he's calling it Purusha. So it doesn't really matter the terminology, but probably, especially at that time, 5,300 years ago, or even older, however many years it was before, it was easier to understand using this terminology. We can just assume that. Whereas to a newcomer, it doesn't matter what you call it, it's new. So Prakrti constitutes everything we see in the universe, while Purusha is the indweller of the body. So the thing in me that says, I have to do this, I have to wake up, I have to go to bed, I have to prepare for Gita class, or something like that. That cognizance and that awareness is the Purusha, it's the indweller. And he says that both matter and spirit are beginningless. See, Prakrti is matter, and the Purusha is the spirit, to put it in Western terms. and they're beginningless. How can that be? So if someone asks you, how did Brahman and Maya come? You talk about Brahman or Paramatman, and then you talk about Maya. How did they come? Well, according to Krishna, they never came because they've always been. They were always there, and they are still there, and they will always be there. They've been there from beginningless time. The only change that we can talk about is a stative change where in the Pralaya column, or the time of dissolution of the universe, Maya exists only in the subtle form because there is no universe. So it's in that seed form alone that it exists. And then when the creation happens, again, it of course manifests. Now, I know people are going to start wondering some questions, so we're going to preemptively address the kind of question marks that are going to be appearing in people's minds. The typical Vedantic answer to how the universe came into being is the universe came out of a mixture of Brahman and Maya. Brahman and Maya, okay? Brahman is the supreme being and Maya is the illusory world that we see. So how can you talk about, a mixture of the two? Well, the Brahman-Maya mishmash has another name, which is Ishvara. It's not my concept. This is what Vedanta says. It's not meant to make light of God, because Ishvara means God, right? God is simply Brahman plus Maya. 1 cup Brahman, 1 cup Maya. It's a very simple recipe, right? That'll become clear why later, but just consider that. This is the first step of the explanation. God plus all this Maya, Brahman plus all this Maya is God. Okay, now how do we understand this seemingly confusing concept? That is actually already covered to some degree in chapter 7. There, Krishna referred to Brahman and Maya in different terms. Again, more terms. Para Prakrti and Apara Prakrti. So he said Brahman was Para Prakrti, the higher nature, and Maya is Apara Prakrti, the lower nature. Because it's obvious that the Maya gets dissolved at the end of the creation and the dissolution time. So then how can it be higher than Brahman? Because the Brahman is the only thing that exists during the dissolution. So naturally, what comes and goes is considered inferior. But the sum of the two is what we call Ishvara, or God. And another important distinction is that Para Prakriti is consciousness or sentience, whereas Apara Prakriti is inert matter. Okay. So all of this talk about mixing, about Brahman plus Maya, may lead one to question, how in the world can this be Vedanta? I thought it was supposed to be non-dualism. So why are you doing this? Why are you confusing me? Well, the world's already confusing enough, so I don't have to do anything to make it confusing. But when you say Brahman and Maya have always been there, it sounds like Dvaita, it sounds like duality, not Advaita. It doesn't sound like non-dualism. The crucial point here is that one has inherent existence while the other depends on the existence of the first. In other words, Brahman is, and Maya is to some degree, but it has no independent existence of its own. So let's say you're walking down the street and you get a phone call from a friend. And they said, I got to talk with you about something really private. Are you alone? And you say, no, I'm not alone. And he or she says, well, who else is there? And you say, well, there's me and there's my shadow, and that makes 2 of us. The guy's like, are you nuts? Right? So our shadow follows us wherever we go. It has a head, it has arms, it has legs, and it moves around just like we do. But do we count it? No. Why not? Because it doesn't have a separate existence other than me. So another example is your image in a mirror, and this is even closer to the reality. Let's say you look at a mirror, and then you say, okay, there's one me and there's two me, so there's two people. And you go to somebody else and they have one of those, with the 3 or 4 mirrors all around the sink, and you're like, oh God, there's 4 of us. I only have a coupe. I can only see 2. How am I going to get home? It's not like that. We know that these are just reflections, and we don't count them. So no matter how crystal clear that reflection may be, we understand that it doesn't count as a separate entity. That is the important point. In the same way, Brahman is the only entity that is counted. So you don't have 1 Brahman, 2 Brahman, 3 Brahman like that. It's only 1 Brahman. Maya is just a reflection of Brahman, like your shadow or like your reflection in the mirror. So it's like the shadow of Brahman. We cannot deny a degree of reality to Maya though, because like the shadow, we know that it doesn't have a separate existence, but it has some effect on us, right? Why does it have an effect on us? I mean, if it's our shadow, then it shouldn't be able to create any fear or sorrow in us, right? Or wrong? Here's a little video to help you understand the reality of that. See, take a look at this. This is what we were doing when we were little. Doesn't matter where you are, China, Korea. So you don't see the shadow, you're perfectly happy. Then suddenly, oh my God, Maya's coming to get me, help, Amma, help me. Oh no, it won't leave me alone. I can't get rid of Maya, Amma. Okay, you get the point, right? So, because, see, the difference between these little babies and us is that we have known that our shadow is not real. Knowledge now has saved us from suffering at the hands of the big bad boogeyman of our shadow. But when it comes to Maya, we have yet to acquire that same knowledge. We're helpless. And no matter how much our mother, Amma, tells us, it's just your shadow, don't cry, it's not going to hurt you, we still keep crying because we haven't realized that truth. And who knows how long it takes a baby to figure it out. Obviously, they didn't figure it out the first time around because the mom was telling her and she was still crying. And that's why Amma says that Maya is real on the experiential level, just like these babies, even though it doesn't have any inherent existence. And that is precisely what mithya means. Mithya means what is seemingly here, but as good as non-existent. So we cannot discount it completely, nor can we count it as an independent existence. And when we put it in those terms, we can claim to be true to the principles of Advaita Vedanta. We cannot discount it totally, but we cannot count it either. So now I'm going to show you one slide that will summarize these 2 entities for us to understand clearly. The Purusha. Purusha means man in Sanskrit, unfortunately. It's just the word they used at that time. And Prakrti is like Shakti, the divine feminine. But don't worry about, actually we're going to see later on, Jnanadev clarifies that it's not really about gender. So what is Purusha? It's Paramatma, Brahman, it's the Atma, it's Para Prakrti, it's the Kshetraknya. So from this chapter 13, the only term that is actually unique is Kshetraknya. Whereas Prakrti is Maya, Anatma. It is we could say, call it the Jiva, perhaps, right? The individual existence that we feel separate from God. It is the Apara Prakrti, sorry, I forgot to put that there. And it is the Kshetra. I missed two of them, sorry. So we can understand that. Purusha is sentient because it's the consciousness, whereas Prakrti is insentient. It is the inert matter that makes up this universe. The Purusha is changeless because it's consciousness, right? It is ever the same. Prakrti is changing. It is never the same. And if you look at yourself in the mirror every morning, you'll see that actually even our own body is changing, our mind is changing, our likes and dislikes are changing. Everything about us besides the consciousness is changing. And the Purusha is free from attributes like big, small, colors and, size and moving and all that kind of thing. Has no name particularly, except for Brahma. They had to force that name on it. And Prakrti has attributes. Everything in this world has a form, and that form is delineated by its limitations. So all the attributes create limitations. That's the other thing about Purusha. Since it's free from attributes, it's infinite, and Prakrti has attributes, so it's finite. And the last one is Satyam, which means real, and Mithya, which means illusory existence. So this should be clear. There's a lot more to say about these two, about this distinction, but let's start from here. I think this is enough to focus on for now. Then in this verse, Krishna says, all modifications and gunas. Remember, gunas means qualities, and here it's also going to be extended to the concept of experiencing those qualities. He's saying they're all born of Prakrti. That's what the verse says. And Prakrti modifies, it's Prakrti that modifies to become the universe. And they say both sentient and insentient. Wait a second, I thought you said sentient was Purusha. Yes, it is. But the equipment that we all have, that is the medium through which that consciousness shines, that is Prakrti. And that includes all those things I said, the mind, the intellect, everything. Even your prana, we talk about our prana. Oh, it feels like this, it feels like that, I'm tired, I'm feeling good, etc. That's the energy level. The energy levels may be sattva, rajas, tamas, whatever it is, it's still matter as far as Vedanta is concerned. Because all of that goes bye-bye when the whole universe dissolves. So, it is still Prakrti. And how does Prakrti become the universe like that? Does it do it all on itself? Inert matter, it just says, okay, I think I'm going to become this. No. Krishna said in chapter 9, verse 10, because of my proximity, Prakrti produces all this, the moving and unmoving. So, what falls into under the category of Prakrti means everything. All 125 billion galaxies, and probably much more that science doesn't know about yet, all of that is Prakrti. And all modifications of these gunas, these qualities, are also Prakrti. Everything. All sounds, all colors, tastes, shapes. And internal qualities like likes or dislikes, like being introspective or being very extroverted. These are all Prakrti. Those qualities are. So, there's nothing in this world that we can perceive or conceptualize that is not Prakrti. Everything is. So the physical body seems to be alive, of course, but it is a product of Prakrti. This is what he's saying. So the physical body is a product of something that is inert. So the physical body is definitely inert in nature, because all bodies are modifications of Prakrti. We're going to talk about more about how that can be, but just this is the point of this verse. And here, the Saint Jnanadev from hundreds of years ago shares some clarity on this Purusha Prakrti juxtaposition. Though they have different names, the principle underlying them is the same. And this aspect should not be forgotten. I tell you again and again. The sole entity is Purusha, and the totality of actions is Prakrti. The intellect, the senses, the heart, all these attributes, and the three Gunas, Sattva, etc. This entire group is created from Prakrti, who is the source of all activity. Now we need to figure out, resolve some of this seeming contradictions in our mind, so we better keep moving because the answers are coming. Karya karana kartarutve hetu prakritir uchyate purusha sukha dukkhanam bhoktarutve heturuchyate. I changed this just a little bit. The beginning remains the same. Prakrti is said to be the cause and the bringing forth of the body and the senses, while the Purusha, and in parentheses, individual self, is said to be the cause of the experience of pleasure and pain. So a little bit of change here. While the Purusha, or individual self, is said to be the cause of the experience of pleasure and pain. Okay. This is a little more direct translation of the verse. About this Prakrti concept. One commentator has said something really nice. He said, Prakrti is the foster mother leading the Jivatma, the individual soul, from the unreal to the real, from ignorance to enlightenment, and from death to immortality. So this process from the unreal to the real is asato ma sadgamaya, that prayer that we chant. So the Prakrti, actually this whole world of Maya, is a foster mother to us. And this foster mother, her only purpose is to lead us from that ignorance to knowledge, from the unreal to the real. So when we're thinking that, it's such a terrible Maya, it's really causing me so much grief, it's the other way around. See, because if you think about it in terms of the shadow, if you're looking at the shadow, constantly focusing on the shadow, you're turning your back on the sun. The sun, remember I told you, is the symbol of the real self. So if you focus on the shadow, you're never going to see the sun. But if you see, oh, there's the shadow, so I have to look this way to see the sun. If we use it in that way, then we'll go from the non-real to the real. And the real mother, you see, this is just a foster mother. Who's the real mother? Devi, the goddess of the universe. She's beyond. Verse I like to quote, Mahapralaya Sakshinyē Namaha. She, I bow down to her, who is the witness of the massive dissolution of, the grand dissolution of the whole universe. So, she's the real mother. And here Jnanadev says something interesting. He says, bad actions result in misery, while good actions create happiness. And the Purusha experiences both of these. Prakrti goes on performing actions, and the Purusha experiences their fruit so long as pleasure and pain are created. Then it's really funny. He puts it into the context of like a husband-wife arrangement. Those of you who are married will get this easily. This arrangement of affairs between Prakrti and Purusha appears inconsistent, since whatever the wife earns, the husband simply enjoys. The wife and the husband do not associate with each other, nor do they agree, yet the wife gives birth to the entire universe. What a wonder. So, he was a teenager when he wrote this, so he's no average teenager to be able to have such insightfulness and acumen and wisdom. So the entire inert universe is simply the modification of Prakriti. And then let's come back to our body and mind. So how does that work? Because, they seem like they're sentient. They act as though they're sentient. And Krishna's responding to that in this verse because he includes the body and the mind. So the viewpoint of science is that the mind is a conscious entity. It's not matter. You have matter, that's something like this that I can hit with a hammer. But I can't hit the mind with a hammer. It's too subtle, right? So it must be the locus of consciousness. And that's why we have expressions like mind over matter, right? But Vedanta says mind equals matter, which is hard for us to accept. Then the question comes, if the body and mind are both matter, why don't they act like other insentient matter? Well, we have an answer for that. Yes, the body will behave like inert, insentient matter as soon as the subtle body leaves. This body of mine, of yours, everybody's, as soon as that subtle body is gone, it starts to decompose and it's going to become dirt, it's going to become ashes. And one commentator used to say, me minus consciousness is mud. You minus consciousness is mud. We're all mud without the consciousness. So yes, it is inert, but not yet. For a little while longer, perhaps, hopefully till the end of this class, it remains there so that I don't turn to mud. But Amma says, we never know. But for now, the subtle body is still in a physical body, so it reflects consciousness. And what was that name again? Reflected consciousness? Chit abhasa, chitabhasa. Just simply means the reflection of consciousness. Chit. And that original, that pure consciousness before getting reflected is what we call the Purusha. And here's a little example that is very commonly used to clarify, to exemplify this theory. So before you turn on the light switch, is the electricity already in the wire or not? It is. It's there. It's pure. It's not interacting with anything except for the wire. Just forget about that. But it's unmanifest. You cannot see it. You cannot perceive it. It's not noticeable. And the light bulb also shows no sign of life, so to speak. But when you turn on that switch, the tungsten filament starts to glow, and the bulb looks alive, so to speak. So birth, so what we call birth, is like connecting the bulb is the physical body, to the electricity. And then when you turn on the electricity, it's that consciousness expressing itself through the subtle body, which is the tungsten filament in the light bulb. Now, forget about this LED and everything. I'm not quite ready to make it into an LED metaphor, but I'll figure that one out soon. So turning the switch off and on is going between deep sleep and the waking state. Because the electricity is still flowing, but the switch is off. So when you put the light bulb in there, it's birth, and then so the electricity is already flowing through it, so that bulb and tungsten filament combination begins to shine with light. But when you go to bed at night, you turn off that light, and then it's there, but you can't see it. The electricity is still there. The life force is still there. You turn the light back on, and then consciousness. It looks like the consciousness is coming and going. The electricity is coming and going, but it's not. It's always there. And when the filament breaks and can no longer manifest the electricity, that's what we call death. The subtle body, it doesn't break, it just departs from the physical body. Remember that analogy of that reflective membrane on the back of the mirror peeling off? When it peels off, it doesn't reflect anymore. The glass pane remains, but it's not any good as a mirror. So same thing for the subtle body. It peels off, you could say, from the physical body, and then there's no more reflection. So in order for that reflection to take place, the chit needs a proper reflective medium, which is the subtle body, right? And just like electricity needs that filament, you can't plug in a shoe or a banana and expect it to radiate, right? Just like that, the body itself alone cannot reflect it. That's why we have quote-unquote dead bodies. Somebody's walking around and saying, there's Fred. And then you see the dead body. And then you don't say, there's Fred. You say, there's Fred's body. Fred left, right? We know that somehow, and our language reflects that knowledge. So something left, and that's the subtle body. So now regarding the senses, isn't it, people might say, how can it be that the Purusha, the consciousness is the one who's sensing everything, because the ears are doing it, right? And then someone might say, well, no, actually it's the faculty of hearing, because even if the ears are there, some people can't hear anything. So maybe there's a faculty of hearing inside somewhere. We can dissect it and find it. And that's what's hearing. Actually, what Krishna is saying here is that the Purusha, whether you have the physical ears and whether you have that sense organ, inner organ of hearing, smelling, seeing, and so on, still you need a consciousness principle in order to make all those function. Because otherwise there's no illumination. So that is the Chittabhasa in our case, because we haven't realized that our existence goes beyond this body. So for now, it's just the reflection in this equipment that we've been given. But in this equipment, it is, that chit, the Purusha, essentially, the consciousness that is actually hearing, seeing, smelling, etc. There's only one person who does that, the Purusha. I use that word person just to make it a little more, real in our life. So, it is the Purusha that senses everything through the equipment of all 5 sense organs. And everything that is seen, tasted, smelled, etc. is what? Purusha or Prakrti? Prakrti, right? Because Prakrti is the world. And Purusha is the seer, the knower, the smeller. It's the one that experiences. That's what this verse is trying to tell us. There's the world of objects, and then there's the subject, which is Purusha. So when we see each other, like over YouTube like this, I'm not seeing you, of course, but you're seeing me. So you're seeing me. Now, what are you seeing? Are you seeing the Purusha me, or are you seeing the Prakrti me? Because if you can see it with your eye, it's not the Purusha. The Purusha is the seer. So the Purusha in you is seeing the Prakrti of me. Because you can't, with your eye, you can't see the seer. So even when we're looking at each other like this, it is still, I'm seeing Prakrti and you're seeing Prakrti. And it's the same singular Purusha doing both. The Purusha in me is not separate. The Purusha in you is not separate. We're all accessing that same consciousness. It's like that example that people use sometimes. You have like a lantern, or if it's October, you have a jack-o'-lantern, and you put a candle in there, and you have all kinds of holes on the outside. And then it looks like, oh, so much light coming out of all these different holes. So it's like there's so many lights there. And each one of them is illuminating something. But there's actually only one candle there, and that one candle is enough. And it doesn't mean you need lots of candles. There's one candle, and that light pervades through all those holes, so to speak, apertures. So for us, this body is what would be the analogy for that hole. This is the aperture through which the light of consciousness can shine. And not just shine, but perceive. So, just like the candle is never the object, the Purusha is never the object. And this world is always the object. Purusha is always the subject, seeing, hearing, doing, feeling. And the Prakrti, this whole universe, is always the object. So when someone says, you are like this and you are like that, just know that they're not talking about Brahman, and they're talking about whatever equipment you have this time around. Body, mind, intellect, etc. So consciousness is ever the subject, while matter is always the object. Consciousness can never become an object, and matter can never become the subject. So inert matter cannot witness or see something else, smell something else. So science may analyze consciousness for thousands of years, but to find the real answer, they need to shift their focus from matter to spirit. Objective and empirical investigation will never give the answer, because the answer is the subject itself. And that's what Krishna is saying in this verse. So let us move on to verse 22. Purusha Prakrtisto hi bhunkte Prakrti jan gunan karanam gunasangosya sadasat yoni janmasu. A few modifications here. Purusha, seated in Prakrti, experiences the gunas born of Prakrti. You can just mentally cross off senses, objects of the nature of. Just simplified. Experiences the gunas born of Prakrti. The reason of his birth in good and evil wombs is his contact with, and I'm going to add in parentheses, attachment to, as another derivation of it, is his contact with or attachment to the gunas. So, for this verse, the best thing I feel is for me to share a very illuminating, not to make a pun, but literally illuminating commentary from Jnanadev. It is so helpful. I think, if you don't mind, it'll take me a little while, but I would like to read the whole part to you because it's so to the point. Bear with me. I know a lot of people have been looking for that book. We keep getting questions about it. So, and this will also give you a feeling of what like a whole section might seem like. He starts to explain the Purusha. So he says, He is bodiless and crippled. He is poverty-stricken, worn out, and the oldest of the old. He is male only in name, being neither male, female, nor neuter. He has neither ears nor eyes, neither hands nor feet, neither any form nor any color, and exists only in name. Yet he has to experience pleasure and pain in spite of his nature described above. As for himself, he is non-active, apathetic, and non-enjoyer, yet his faithful wife, Maya, makes him enjoy all. She makes some movements with the small proportion of form and quality she possesses, and makes a display of wonderful games. This Prakrti is called Gunamayi, or consisting of qualities. But no, she is the Gunas, those qualities themselves. She is those Gunas incarnate. The arts emanate from her. The laws are made by her, while the desires, perception, and actions are born of her. She is the very mint of all the sounds, as also the abode of all miracles. Nay, she is the very author of the entire world drama. The creation and dissolution of the universe are her morning and evening occupations. Think about that. That's why in Amma's 108 names, it says she creates universes by just, fluttering her eyelashes. This apart, she is a wonderful fascination in the world. She is the helpmate to the unique Brahman and the kith and kin of the unattached Brahman, since she herself stays in a house in the sphere of zero. Now, that's very profound. She stays in a house in the sphere of the void. So in other words, it's that existence that doesn't exist. Seemingly there, but actually it's just a void, like a reflection or the shadow. Such being the enormity of her glorious state of wifehood, she can control the uncontrollable Purusha. Now, what is that a reference to? That's a reference to us. See, we are the Purusha. We just don't know that. That's the problem. That's the big problem. So, even the uncontrollable Purusha has become controlled in this equipment that Prakrti herself created. It's not her fault, okay, because we're the ones that are ignorant. She said, okay, here, try this on for size. And then we say, okay, right? In fact, Purusha has no attributes. There exists nothing in him. He is perfectly apathetic. I think this word apathetic is not what we would think. I would say he is non-interested, disinterested. Or it's probably nissanga, the original word, which means just detached. It's a little old translation of this Sanskrit to English, or Marathi to English. So instead of apathetic, we could say detached. There exists nothing in him. He is perfectly detached, yet Prakrti herself entirely becomes all that pertains to him. Prakrti herself becomes the origin of the self-born, the form of the formless, and his state and position. She also becomes the desires of the desireless, the contentment of the complete, the race and kindred of the raceless and kinless. She also becomes the symbol of the indescribable, the measure of the measureless, the mind of the mindless, and also his intellect. She stands as the form of the formless, action of the actionless, and the egotism of the non-egoist. This egotism just means the feeling that we have our own existence separate from God. Doesn't have to be like a complicated ego. She becomes the name of the nameless, the birth of the birthless, as also the processes of the action itself. She also becomes the quality of the qualityless, the feet of the feetless, the ears of the earless, and the eyes of the eyeless. She is the feeling of the unfeeling, limbs of the limbless. In fact, she becomes all the attributes of Purusha. Such is Prakrti that pervades and drags the attributeless into attributes. This is, remember, who got dragged into it? We got dragged into it. But we somehow participated in that because otherwise we would be God realized. Our ignorance allowed it to happen. Whatever the inherent qualities exist in him, Purusha, is eclipsed and transfigured into the quality of Prakrti, right? Infinite existence, unchanging, complete sentience, all-pervasiveness. All these qualities have been eclipsed, and now what we see are the qualities of Prakrti, which are the exact opposite, of course. Just as the moon gets invisible on the Amavasya day. Amavasya means the day, like the very first day of the... it means that day between the waxing and waning moon. The waning and waxing moon. So when it wanes completely, that day when you don't see the moon at all is Amavasya. Or just as the clouds arising in the sky transform a good, bright day into a bad, dull, and gloomy one, or like the milk in the abdomen of the cow, or the fire remaining latent in the firewood, or like the brilliance of a jewel covered in a linen, or like a king reduced to the state of helplessness, or like a lion overwhelmed by a malady, a sickness. In all these ways, Purusha loses all his splendor after identifying himself with Prakrti. Now, that we say him, again, remember, there's no gender particularly. So all of us, man, female, neuter, or both combined in one body, whatever, doesn't matter. We basically marry Prakrti by identifying with it. We get married to it. And so now we have a wife or a husband. And so we live together with that, and we depend on Prakrti for our existence, not knowing that we are the substratum of all of this. He goes on to say, a man wide awake, after suddenly falling asleep, is compelled to experience various events during his dream state. In that way, Purusha has got to experience the gunas because he identifies himself with Prakrti. Just as one indifferent to worldly affairs gets fettered on account of his association with someone, so becomes the state of the birthless and eternal Purusha, and he has to bear the blows of births and deaths on account of his association with the gunas. It is just like this. When red-hot iron is hammered on, it is said that the hammer blows are suffered by the fire. Or with the disturbance of water, the moon reflections in it appear more than one. And this plurality, the ignorant attribute, the ignorant attribute to the moon. Or when there is a mirror nearby, there appear two faces, and one the original and the other is its reflection. Or as the surface of a crystal appears to be a reddish color in the proximity of red turmeric, in that way the birthless one appears to have diverse births on account of his association with the gunas. But in reality, he transcends them. This is the point. If you move the surface of the water where the moon is reflecting, you say, oh, I hurt the moon. No. All these examples are to show us that we, not some other entity, is free from Maya. We are free from Maya. We just don't know that. We have to realize that. So, in that manner, take it that he, the Purusha, feels he is getting births in high and low, good or bad orders. But Purusha, in his pristine nature, has never to experience becoming and vicissitudes of births and deaths. The whole conception of his experiencing and having its origin in his association with the gunas is an illusion. That's the conclusion. But in this verse, Krishna says, he is seated in Prakrti. After hearing all that, how can we say he's seated in the Prakrti? Well, it's a figure of speech, of course. It is a reference to Chitabhasa. And that's what Jnanadev was talking about mostly, except when he made, statements that were like absolute statements from the Vedantic standpoint. The rest of it was all about Chitabhasa. So there's no marriage for Brahman, right? But when you identify with Prakrti, we become the Chitabhasa. And it's like we're married to this body. We're married to this mind. We're married to our intellect. We can't stop them. Have you ever felt like I can't stop my mind from thinking about something? That means that it has some control over us. So it's that partner that we're stuck with for the time being. So don't get confused. The consciousness or the Purusha is not seated or located anywhere. It's all pervading, definitely. But in terms of the subtle body, the medium that reflects it, yes. Without a body, we cannot sense it. We cannot talk about it. So Fred's subtle body left, right? So then we cannot talk with Fred anymore through the body. So it's the body and the subtle body, the mind. He's probably talking about the subtle body just as the mind, but even though it includes the energy level and the intellectual level, he just roll it all together and call it the mind. That's probably what he's doing. So we need that physical body to see the subtle body, so it's a combination. And then he says he experiences the gunas born of Prakrti. So like I said earlier, this word guna refers to all sense objects in the world, anything that has any attributes. And all of those are from Prakrti, the fundamental matter of this universe. Like I said, it includes our body and our mind. And these also produce various gunas of their own. So we can say, Swami Shantamritananda, he has brown hair, he's wearing red, he looks like this, he talks like this, he was born this day and date, etc. That's all true of the body. But that's physical information, right? Then the body and the mind create all kinds of experiences internally that other people cannot see. Pain, anguish, joy, confusion, like an energized state, and then like a kind of a tired state. All these states are internal, so these are internal gunas now. We have external and internal. And the inner ones are also created by Prakrti. The type of mind we have, the kind of energy that we're feeling that morning, what kind of intellect we have, all these things. Our beliefs, our convictions, as well as our fears and our negative qualities like arrogance and all that. This is being created inside, mood swings, etc. So it's not just the delicious chocolate cake that is a guna of Prakrti. If you feel guilty after eating the cake, that's also a guna of Prakrti, except it's internal and nobody else can see it. It's created by your mind, it's still a guna. Just like the cold of winter and heat of summer, they're all in the same category, all the gunas. So your jealousy, agitation, pride, everything, dejection, elation, just throw that all in one box with all of the other ones too, like big, fast, slow, small, fast, slow, all that. And since this world is full of countless inescapable experiences, then that's what these experiences are being labeled as gunas here. The experiencer is different. That is Chitabhasa, the reflection of Brahman. And he says he's the bhoktar. It means the one who is eating everything. Or they call it enjoying, but it's not always enjoyable. But they still use that word, enjoy. Means whether it's a pleasant or unpleasant experience, you got to eat it, right? It's like eat your hat. So your karma is your hat, and then you got to eat your hat because you created it. So that eating, whether you like it or not, you have to eat it. And the kinds of changes that come in this world basically are really two in kind. Samyoga, viyoga. So samyoga means something coming together, and then viyoga means separation. So union, separation. So birth is separation from the womb, but union with the world. And then childhood is separation from infancy and coming together with childhood. Same thing when you get older, youth, you're no longer a child. When you're elderly, you're no longer a youth. And then, after that comes old age, illness, and then finally death. Death is the departure from the physical body, but soon again to be joining another physical body. So it's all just coming together and separating. Samyoga, viyoga. So if all these experiences belong to Prakrti, then why don't we understand that? What is preventing us from understanding that if it's the truth? Well, again, we can go back to chapter 7, where Krishna said in verse 13, the whole of creation is deluded by these three qualities, sattva, rajas, tamas. Thus, this entire world does not know me, who is beyond them and is imperishable. So we're so focused on the world that we forget about the one who is beyond the world, who just happens to be our own true nature. The three gunas, whether your mind is interested in sattva, rajas, or tamas, one of these things, or a mixture of all of them, is going to mesmerize our mind, and we're going to go running after something. Because what makes the body run is the mind. Or maybe the intellect to some degree. Most of the time we're in our emotional body, which is the mind, though. So I want this, I want that, I don't like that, I don't like this. So that makes us go hither and thither. So it keeps us very busy, these gunas. And so either we're worried about our physical body, like my face is getting wrinkly every day, or I'm hungry, or I need to work out, or I need to put on weight or lose weight, whatever it is. And if we're not worried about those things, then we're thinking about our subtle body, like on my mind. I'm feeling so upset after that guy criticized me. Who is he to criticize me? So you get stuck in your mental body. So, and if we don't have anything to worry about regarding our own body or mind, we started worrying about other people, my kids, my grandkids, my parents. What about my boss? He's looking kind of sick today. I wonder if does he have COVID? He's going to get me sick. We're not worried about ourselves per se. We have plenty of things to be preoccupied with in other people's lives. And so whatever it is, we end up spending all of our time focused on Prakrti. This body or that body or some other body. And because we are so preoccupied with all this matter and Prakrti, Gunas, we totally forget the fact that we are the Purusha. And that's the saddest part of the story. It's actually a story that Amma has told in Awakened Children, Volume 7. I think it might have been chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken. It's a story about an eagle who was born amidst chickens. He just said somehow the egg, ended up in the chicken's brood. The eagle egg did. So from the time he hatched out of the egg, this eagle thought he was a chicken. And all the chickens are going around scratching the ground, and he starts scratching the ground, and they're, eating little bugs and insects. And he starts doing the same thing, and they all cluck, 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 like a chicken, and he starts going cluck, 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 like that. Just like a chicken. So everything was like a chicken. And even when he was full grown, when a fox came around, just like all the other chickens ran away, he's like 3 times their size, but he ran away also. And the eagles are huge, right? So the guru in this story is the sky eagle. The eagle that he saw flying in the sky. I was like, what is that thing? And then one day it came down and landed, and he's like, who are you? And he says, I'm sky eagle. And then he says, who are you? I said, I'm a chicken. He said, no, you're not a chicken. You're an eagle. I can tell by looking at you. And he says, no. This is what I do, and this is how I do it. I'm a chicken. And then the guru, kept telling him over and over again, but he didn't believe the guru. The sky eagle. Chicken eagle didn't believe sky eagle. Finally, the only recourse was for Sky Eagle to drag Chicken Eagle over to the water and say, hey, look, what do you see? You see a chicken or you see an eagle? And then the Chicken Eagle's like, oh my gosh, we look exactly the same. And he says, yeah, duh, I told you, you're an eagle, you're not a chicken. So this is the job of the guru, and this is what Amma's trying to do with us. We come to her crying during darshan and say, I can't do this, I'm such a failure, and she's like, okay, Chicken Eagle, just come on, I'm going to help you see yourself, your reflection in the water, because Amma is the reflection. If we can see our potential in her life and who she is, then that is the purpose of her life. Then her purpose of coming this time would be served. At least one person, if they got that message and actually succeeded, it's her purpose here has been fulfilled. But we have to rewind the tape for a second. How did Chicken Eagle get identified with the chickens? Because if he was born in an eagle nest, it wouldn't have happened, right? It came because from the contact with all the chickens. So, we were not born in the Paramatma. Here physically we were born in Maya. So, we are associating with Maya. We're associating with matter. And all of our lives are 24/7, our lives are focused on matter, except for a few times in the day, maybe when we remember that we have a higher existence. But a matter-centric life is what we call materialism. So materialism can be wanton materialism, which all of us will certainly not subscribe to, because if you're listening to this, you've already started to look the other way. But now on a deeper level, we have to turn away from materialism. We have to turn away from the concept that I am inherently matter, this body, all these cells, and bones and flesh and all that. So we're still stuck in materialism, but now it's the subtle materialism we have to get rid of. We have to stop identifying with the Prakrti, the matter, and stop thinking that that is what we are. And the problem came from contact with matter. Now, how are we going to get out of that? That's the question. He explains how, it comes through contact with the gunas, but we can add here attachment to the gurus, to the gunas. Because contact with the gunas, with all these things in the world, creates that attachment, which, like Krishna says in chapter 2. So that repeated contact is what gets the jivatma, or the individual soul, attached to Maya. And that's the beginning of samsara. As soon as we get attached to Maya, it's the beginning of samsara. And we know how the story goes after that. It's not going to have a happy ending. It's all downhill from there. So no matter what we do, we will never solve our problems in Maya, because Maya is by definition full of problems. Most people attempt to find happiness by trying to improve Maya, like they're trying to upgrade Maya 2.0 or Maya 4.0, like the Maya 11 or the Maya 12, It's like the latest of Maya, let's get it. But there's no such thing as improving on Maya. It's always going to be Maya, and you're stuck in it right now. So don't try to, Amma said it's like trying to put makeup on a corpse. So at one point, we may feel, I have arrived. I've achieved all I wanted in Maya. But shortly after that, we realize, I think my arrival has departed, because the situation has changed. All the things that I thought were supposed to be perfect, now they're not perfect anymore. They changed. It went and changed on me. Who said it could change? Well, that's the definition of Maya. It's constantly changing. So even if you get what you want or think you've achieved what you wanted, it's going to change. That by definition, that's what Maya is. Just like it came to you, it's going to have to go away sometime. The only thing that won't go away is what has always been there, and that is the Purusha, Brahman, Atman, whatever you want to call it. And ultimately, Maya will make us bow down and admit defeat. I give up. I can't try to change Maya anymore. It's just what it is, and I'm going to accept it because I can't change it. All I can do is change myself. And that's when you start coming to Gita class, probably. Because you realize that the cause of all our trouble is interaction with all these things and not knowing how to distance ourselves from them. So Krishna gives some more detail about how this process of samsara came about. And the next verse is going to give us a hint about how to get out of it, if we can reach that by the end of the class today. He talks about birth in good and evil wombs. Some of the language used here is always archaic, you know. They started translating all these scriptures in the Victorian period, and it was the British scholars. So there's always some, you know, artifact, outdated, archaic language in these translations. But let's go with that word evil. What does that stand for? The actual words in Sanskrit are sat and asat. That means, sat is like, it means real, and asat means unreal. But that here it means like good and not so good. We could put it that way. And fortunately, Shankaracharya explains what this indicates. Good wombs mean birth as devas. Devas, wow, that means like the celestial beings. Evil wombs means birth as an animal, etc. Partly good and partly evil indicates a human birth. Oh gosh. Well, at least that explains why we have both human and animalistic tendencies in us, right? But the fact is that moksha is only possible in human form. So we can be thankful for that we have this human form, that we at least have a chance, opportunity to achieve moksha in this birth. But the point in this part of the verse is that by adhering to supreme gunas like sattva as much as possible, the jivatma, the individual soul, is born as a deva, or we could just call it a fully evolved human. And when we cling to the inferior gunas like tamas, then we're going to be born as an animal, or worse, like amoeba or something like that. So, but when you're stuck in the middle, like this mixture of mostly rajas with a sprinkling of sattva and maybe a healthy portion of tamas mixed in with the rajas, then that's where you're born as a mediocre human being, which is probably what all of us are, to be really honest. Even if you're a Swami around Amma, you know, at least in my case, I'll speak for myself, it was only because Amma brought us somehow close to her and gave us that opportunity. Otherwise, there's no way that, at least in my mind, that I started this birth with anything other than a mediocre human being qualifications. Still am, but you know what I mean. And the real question now is how to make the mind like and want more sattva. That is the real thing. And that is the whole purpose of Amma's birth. Remember, this chapter is talking about Amma. The Purusha is Amma. There's only one Purusha. There's only one man in this whole universe, and it's Amma. Swamiji said it the other day. Everybody else doesn't qualify. Whether they're male, female, neuter, both, doesn't matter. You have to be God realized. Amma's the only one. But she's come here to help us experience or to realize our true being, our birthright. And so her first task is to make us want what's good for us. Because until we met Amma, we may not have even known what was good for us, much less liked it. Now she tells you this is what is good for your spiritual growth. And we're like, how am I going to learn how to like that, Because Archana, when I first did it, was so excruciating. Look, it took hours. So, I mean, it takes a long time to develop a liking for it. At least for me, it did. Mediocre human being, right? So, that is what Amma's here for. She's coming to introduce to us what is going to help us, if not in this lifetime and in the next one or another, some future life, to realize our true being, sattva. And through that whole spectrum, she has to get us from tamas to rajas all the way up to sattva. So, and then we have to like all those too, otherwise we will just go back to our old ways, when nobody's watching. So, we have a few minutes to cover one more verse. We might not be able to do the questions today, but I'll do those next week. Let us do verse 23 together. This first word is a mouthful. I will chant that whole thing together because it's hard to do it without stopping. Upadrashtanumanta cha bharta bhokta maheshwaraha paramatmeti chapyukto dehesmin purusha paraha. So a few modifications in the translation. And the Supreme Purusha in this body as the Spirit is also called the witness, the guide, the sustainer, the experiencer, the overlord, and the Paramatma, which we can put in parentheses, Supreme Self being. Keep it on the slide for a moment, just one more minute. So the witness, the guide, has other translations that we're really going to have to look at while we talk about the meaning. Some call it the consenter, the permitter. Actually, permitter is probably closest, I feel. And sustainer can also be considered to be the supporter. Same thing, a little bit different nuance. And the experiencer, often they use the word enjoyer because of that word bhoktar. And overlord is actually simply the word Maheshwara, which we must have all heard many times, Maheshwara. And the absolute refers to Paramatma, which we can call the Supreme Self or Supreme Being. All right, now we'll go on. So on the surface, this verse looks like it's just providing a few synonyms for Purusha. So it doesn't mean much of anything we might feel. But it has a very deep significance that we need to reflect upon when we are studying this verse. Just as we get into samsara through contact with the gunas of Prakrti, like he said in the previous verse, and that means all of our pleasant and unpleasant experiences in this world, if that's the case, there must be a way to get out of samsara by shifting our contact from the world to something else, from Maya to something else. And if that's correct, then we need to know what that something is. Towards what am I supposed to shift my contact? Not just physical, but internal. And how do I come in contact with that? So that's something is, not surprisingly, the Purusha, because it's the only thing left. Once you discount Maya, then there's only Purusha left. So that's the Atman. We say Atman in this context because that's how we get in touch with it. Because it's the Atman, it's the self. I don't say like Brahman because then what is Brahman? It's everything, it's the totality. So, but for me, when I'm trying to get in contact with it on a daily basis, in my daily life, I have to think of it as the Atma. It's a nomenclatural distinction, but helpful. And we need to understand how to have contact with that. It's easy to understand how our contact with the worldly experiences affects our mind and our condition because it's very concrete. So we can kind of conceptualize a path towards freeing ourselves from that kind of contact, like denying it or seeing that there's something better, satsang with Amma is better than watching TV or something like that. There are ways in which we can convince ourselves to not even necessarily cut off all connection with Maya, which is impossible, but just to reduce the harmful contact, so to speak. But if we don't simultaneously make contact with something higher and more beautiful spiritually, then a vacuum can be created in our mind. And that's when we begin to falter. So we should understand the glories of the Paramatman to fill in that vacuum. Because right now, it's like, how am I going to appreciate the Paramatma, the Purusha? I never met him. No, you haven't met him because he's you, actually. But still, we're looking for things objectively. And we're never going to find it as an object. So we need to understand what are the glories of this Paramatma. And that's what he's showing in this text, in this verse. But before we go into it, I want to make it very clear that the easiest and most expedient way for us to achieve this is through our relationship with Amma. Amma is Purna Brahma Surupini, remember? She's Satchidananda Murti. She is the incarnation of the fullness of Brahman. She is the Satchidananda personified. She is the personification of existence, awareness, and bliss. So we can feel that consciousness, that Atma Chaitanya in her presence, not just physically, but even through that live stream, we'll get a degree of that. How many times have we felt relieved and rejuvenated just seeing Amma? Even if it's not live, you just see a video of Amma, and she suddenly looks at the camera and then you're like, just bathed in bliss. So now we need to figure out how to experience that more constantly. Not just during the live stream. We want to experience it, come in contact with it throughout the day if we can. And we can do that by listening to her bhajans, reading her books, and reading stories of her disciples and whatnot. But ultimately, we're going to need to learn how to contact inside. And that's not something we can do physically. It's a process that takes place entirely within us, and it takes a lot of practice, which means that I also am in the same boat with all of you. So we're all trying to do the same thing. We have to remind ourselves as frequently as possible. When I say I'm referring to the Chittabhasa, to the reflection of consciousness. I manifest here in this body. Okay, I'm stuck. But this is not my home. My home is in Amma, in the Paramatman, and I'm not going to forget that today. Amma says that when people go on a picnic, they enjoy their time in a scenic and peaceful place, but they never forget where their home is. It's not like, oh, wait a second, is this my home? No, we know that. We remember that we have a home elsewhere. And they're always aware that the place they are in is only a temporary location from them. And because it's temporary, they don't get attached to the picnic bench or to the tree that's there or the rabbit they see running around or the bird that's flying in the sky, because they know it's temporary. So for us, that temporary location is this body and the world around us. So we have to remember that it's just like a picnic. This body, she also compares it with a traveler, a visitor. I'm visiting this body, I'll have to leave it. This whole world is like a big picnic, and I'm enjoying. It's not always a fun picnic. Sometimes it doesn't feel like a picnic at all. It feels like boot camp or an emotional desert or something like that. But whatever the experience is, we remember that it's, number one, it's not our true home. Number two, it's temporary, whether it's good or bad. So that means that everything that happens here is not ours, and we're going to have to relinquish it sometime. So in light of that, all the terms that Krishna uses in this verse can help us potentially change our perspective on this body and our entire life. And I'm going to explain that glorious meaning of all these terms next week. We ran out of time. I cannot justify going any longer. You're going to have to wait a week to hear the explanation of these terms. But in the meantime, the homework assignment is to practice it. Try to feel these things in your daily life, and we can come back and when you hear the explanations, the descriptions of them in more detail, you can see how you did as part of your homework assignment. Om Namah Shivaya. So we will close with the first two prayers, Asatoma and Lokaha, and then we'll meditate for some time, concluding with another mantra, but just for those who have time, you can remain and meditate with us. Take a deep breath. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sugino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sugino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sugino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Those of you who have time, please join us for a brief meditation where we try to assimilate these teachings that we have just heard from Lord Krishna. Check your posture. Close your eyes. Slow down the breathing process. And feel the body and mind relax further and further with each and every deep inhalation and exhalation. Trying to feel Amma's subtle presence, a powerful energy all around you. As though you're already in her embrace. And feel that same presence within you. As the mind calms down and the breath goes deeper, the thoughts slowly recede, and we can focus our mind more easily. Let us now focus our mental visualization powers on each part of the body, witnessing them. Remember, witnessing them as though we were looking at them as separate from us. Begin with the feet. Witness the feet. Observe them mentally. Be aware of your ankles. Mentally observe your calves and shins. Be aware of your knees. Visualize your thighs. Witness the hips and pelvis. The lower back and abdomen. Witness the upper back and chest. The shoulders. The upper arms. Witness your elbows and lower arms. Witness your wrists, hands, and fingers. The neck as well. The face and the entire head. Until now we are witnessing something, an object. But in that space of witnessing, we need not add anything. Simply remain in that state of witnessing, not focusing on any object in particular. Abide in that state of witnessing. Now, as we chant the concluding mantra, the Sanskrit prayer, try to view that as a witness as well. Witness your own body chanting those mantras. Witness the vibrations and try to retain that state of witnessing for as long as possible afterwards. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamavaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, slowly open your eyes. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for joining us. This Saturday, day after tomorrow, there will be a beautiful program to be conducted in the East Coast ashram, the main ashram there in DC. Brahmachari Ramananda Amritaji will be conducting a celebration of both Rama and Hanuman, because it falls in between Ram Navami and Hanuman Jayanti. So we encourage everyone to participate in that event. Normally, our satsang or evening Saturday bhajans would be conducted right around the same time. But we're not going to do that, so that everybody can focus on that one program. And we'll see you next Thursday for Gita class. Om Namah Shivaya.